brilliant and he was belligerent. In full flight, he was beautiful to watch. He had intelligence, stamina, and boundless courage. The benchmark for fast bowling excellence, Dennis Lillee, is one of ESPN's legends of cricket. At the Oval in the 1981 Ashes series, Dennis Lillee took 11 wickets in a remarkable all-round fast bowling performance.
And just look at those figures. A really beautiful batting pitch here. He's had a bit of pace and Lillee has made the most of it.
And from the look of him, he's also just starting to get his health right.
Dennis Lillee's performances through 1981 were quite extraordinary because he was a very sick man early on the tour. Suffering from a form of pneumonia. But it wasn't really until the sixth test at the Oval that Lillee was physically at his peak and he was the dominant bowler on view. And despite everything that both of them did in that series and despite all of Alderman wickets, what Lillee did in that Oval test was show that he was still the number one bowler.
Off the top edge.
The Dennis Lillee of the early 80s was a world away from the young tearaway of the early 70s. He had reinvented himself as the shrewdest tactical bowler in the game.
And this bowling in behind his pads.
That's why he was top of my list in the bowling department. Because what he did, yes, he did have genuine all-out pace when he first started. And then he had the back injury, and I think it was out for almost 2 years. And he came back, he worked hard and came back. But he learned how to work the ball, make it cut, how to bowl slower delivery, how to bowl the odd real quick delivery, and he could change his run. So he really was the master.
Dennis Lillee is the greatest fast bowler for me the world's ever seen. If there's been one better going back into history, I would have loved to have seen him bowl because he was poetry. He had a tremendous approach, his build up to the wicket and his delivery stride, beautiful delivery stride. He stood up, left knee, stiff as a poker. Beautiful action, wonderful follow-through, tremendous.
He could do anything with a cricket ball. He could swing it out, he could swing it in at will, he could build a ferocious bouncer, and he had a demonic aggression, which, you know, if you were a little bit uncertain of your batting ability, must have made it a terrifying experience.
New Zealand, Lillee to Howarth. And again, an appeal for an LBW decision.
One of the best. I can't believe there could have been many better than Dennis Lillee. He was furiously fast. He was very intimidating.
And we have all men up there in a line. The only man in front of the wicket is Dennis Lillee.
Well, I've always said that Dennis Lillee was a captain's dream and a batsman's nightmare. And I think that's probably the best description I could come up with. To overcome Dennis Lillee, you had to not only beat his ability, but you had to get past that iron will of his. And that was, I mean, it was hard enough to beat him on ability, but to get past him with that iron will determination that he had made him a very difficult proposition.
Oh, he's just awesome. I was lucky in World Series cricket. I roomed with him, which was an experience itself. I was a young guy coming up, and he was clearly at the top of his powers. He was just a magnificent bowler, very, very aggressive, very skillful, and if you could play a test match with him today and it'll be absolutely fantastic, and you play a Shield game against him the next weekend and you'll be in a war.
In addition to his bowling intelligence, Lillee throughout his career showed limitless fortitude and courage to conquer serious injury.
He first came to the West Indies in '73 when he was an out-and-out fast bowler, only played one test match and his back went. And he then went through 2 years getting himself back ready again with a kind of regimen which demanded daily physiotherapy work, and that was discipline, and of course that's what all cricketers need. And then when he came back, perhaps he wasn't as fast as he was in '73, but he was a much better bowler. He swung the ball away, cut it back in, he could do almost anything with the ball. And I'm sure if you ask the West Indians of that era, and all West Indians who saw him, they'd say that he was the best they'd seen.
Lillee was two bowlers. He had a longish career in the end. He started life as a genuinely very, very fast ferocious, attacking fast bowler. He ended it as a complete master of his trade.
Put it back, it's gone, yes! There's Lillee, what a bowler!
Lillee made his first-class debut for Western Australia in the 1969-70 season. His second wicket was a catch, taken by a 21-year-old wicketkeeper, Rodney Marsh. Court Marsh bowled Lillee was to be a regular line on scorecards for the next decade and a half.
It was just one of those things, I think, as an Australian kid growing up, that just made you walk a few inches taller. That combination when you knew it was singing was something that everybody just took a little bit of pride in. That here was a combination that just really had the world's number, and it was as a kid growing up in Australia, that was a pretty wonderful thing.
And he's edged it behind Mat Wkts, and he is out for naught.
Lillee began his international career in style, taking 5 wickets in the first innings of the first test against England. By the end of the series, he was being hailed as a possible future champion bowler.
Immediately, one had to be impressed by his bowling. I remember John Hampshire was playing for England in the Adelaide Test match, which was Dennis's debut. 8 ball overs in those days, and John Hampshire played and missed at 5 in a row from Dennis, bowling from the city end at the Adelaide Oval, so he knew there was a special talent that had arrived on the scene.
The following season, a World 11 toured Australia after the South African tour had been cancelled. In the second match, Dennis Lillee produced an extraordinary spell. He took 8 for 29 in 57 deliveries, the last 6 without conceding a single run.
Even a raw Lillee, you saw that he had so much intelligence, because he varied his pace at that stage. He didn't try to bounce you out. He realized very quickly that the Perth pitch, and of course he came from Western Australia, so obviously he knew the Perth pitch like the back of his hand. But he pitched the ball up to you. He didn't try and bang the ball in short, because every time he did that, it would sail over the wicketkeeper's head. So he pitched the ball up, and he got batsmen like Garfield Sobers, Clive Lloyd, Rohan Kenai into all kinds of trouble.
He really destroyed us there. And I remember as I went into bat, Rodney Marsh was standing something like 20 yards back. And I looked at Rodney and I said to him, what are you doing back there? And he said, you wait, you'll find out. And the first ball that Dennis bowled to me was a short pitch ball, and I'd never seen anything like it.
Despite having played just 2 official tests, Lillee went to England in 1972 as Australia's most experienced fast bowler. He took 31 wickets in the Test series, a record for an Australian in an Ashes series in England. At the Oval, he took 10 for 181.
I first saw Dennis Lillee in 72 when he came over. He hadn't had a lot of experience then. Massey, in fact, bowling the other end, got the early accolades really because of his extremely remarkable performance at Lord's. But Lillee was the star of that series.
Dennis Lillee looking again for his 5th wicket in this innings. And he's got it.
I always remember after the second test match when Bob Massey took those 16 wickets, John Inverity, who was the 3rd select on the tour, said, we've unearthed a great bowler here. And I can always remember saying in the selection meeting, well, we may have, but I reckon there's going to be even a better bowler up the other end in Dennis Lillee, and that proved to be the case. He was a great bowler, certainly the best fast bowler that I ever played with or against.
During the 1973 Australian tour of the West Indies, Dennis Lillee was diagnosed with 3 stress fractures in his lower back. He continued to bowl in net practice and suffered a 4th fracture. These were career-ending injuries for most bowlers, but those who proclaimed Lillee to be finished seriously underestimated the character of the man.
Of all Dennis's achievements, to me that was the greatest one, to again come back from an injury that has ended other careers. Whereas, a Lillee basically went back to the drawing board and reinvented himself into a bowler that was, again, very, very successful on the world stage. And again, of all his achievements, I think the ability to not only come back from that injury, but to basically reinvent himself to a large extent, is probably the greatest achievement of his career.
Lillee was out of cricket for a year and a half. He devoted himself to a rigorous strength building and fitness program that would evolve into something of a blueprint for the management of fast bowlers' injuries.
He went back and actually approached it very logically, and since then he's been able to pass this on to other people, that he worked out what he was doing wrong, he changed his action, and he's actually very interesting to talk to now about young bowlers who have injuries, because he's studied it a lot and he's very good at it.
Dennis's identification of all those things that he overcame, and the fact that there was much more research done into it, is one of the reasons why we've got people like Lillee, for instance, who's come back. You know, they've all had problems when they've been younger, and I think that in that respect, Dennis actually did us a great service.
He was the first of what I would call true professional cricketers, in that he got himself very, very fit. He trained hard, worked on his action, particularly after a debilitating back injury. There'd be a lot of fast bowlers who would accredit following a Dennis Lillee regime as the man they wanted to emulate.
Lillee returned to Test cricket for the home series against England in 1974-75. Lillee's pace partnership with the blindingly fast Jeff Thomson destroyed the Englishman.
He came back after a serious stress fracture, and what I particularly remember is the sheer shock of the opposition at thinking they were going to play a slightly weakened Australian fast attack and finding themselves running into a revived Dennis Lillee. And Jeff Thomson, of course, just coming into his brief prime. And it's never been more ferocious than it was when those two were playing.
Lillee and Thomson, at their peak, you could probably hardly imagine anything more destructive. I mean, 74-5, when we got them, Thommo was at his youngest and fastest, and Lillee was just beginning to be experienced and accurate, and there wouldn't be many. I mean, people talk about the recent Australian team, was it the finest ever? And I must say, not many of any team would have done that well against Lillee and Thomson.
Dennis Lillee to Peter Parfitt.
Dennis Lillee approaching the wicket really is poetry in motion.
Bowl him!
Everything that's been written since then, I think, focuses on the Dennis Lillee approach, that gathering momentum, pick yourself up, and then the rock back and side on in position and let it go, whereas Jeff Thomson just picked up the ball, went out and bowled like a gorilla at a million mile an hour. It was just awesome, the contrast between the two physiques and the two approaches.
Dennis was, number one, firstly, super quick, rapid, then he had the injury, and then he realised he was a smart thinking fast bowler, which is rare because fast bowlers don't have brains, so I like to think, but he did, and he was smart. Then he realised, I can't beat him with sheer pace, I'll just bowl a couple of leg cutters or set him up some other way. Tremendously fit, wouldn't take a backward step, win at all cost attitude. Good enough to be Victorian, Dennis Lillee.
The 1975-76 home series against the West Indies was advertised as the heavyweight battle of the fast men. It was in this era of great pace bowling that Lillee established his reputation as the greatest.
I still use Dennis Lillee as the example of the best I've faced. Now that takes some doing, because if you look back through my career, you've got people like Lillee, Thomson, admittedly after he'd lost some of his power after the shoulder injury, all those West Indians, the Garners, the Marshalls, the Roberts, the Crofts, the Holdings, in any order, they're all fine bowlers. Richard Hadley, another fine bowler. And yet, I still put Dennis right up there.
One thing about Dennis, if he had the new ball or the old ball, if it was 11:30 or it was 5:30, he was still running in, trying different things. He never gave up. If things are in his favour, yes, he tried even harder. If it wasn't, he was out there giving his best. He was one of the greatest bowlers, if not the greatest I've known.
The The 1977 centenary test at the Melbourne Cricket Ground was punctuated by a number of remarkable performances, but none was more remarkable than Dennis Lillee's 11-wicket haul.
In the centenary test, March 1977, Derek Randall got the Man of the Match award for his 174, but Lillee should have got it, because after the remarkably low-scoring first innings, the wicket went very flat indeed, and he bowled quite superbly in that match.
I would say that the bloke who won that test match was actually was the fact that Dennis just kept bowling those long spells on what I wouldn't have called a responsive wicket for fast bowling, and yet he performed magnificently.
Like many players of the era, Lillee saw World Series cricket as a positive experience for the game as a whole.
Lillee would say that the modern players owe a great deal to the World Series cricket players and the ones who pulled out of official cricket to take part in that particular brand of the game. Before World Series cricket came along, the players were very poorly paid. Most of them were amateurs or at least semi-professional, and they had jobs which they were holding down, even though the game was generating an enormous amount of interest and indeed revenue. That mix turned around a little bit when World Series cricket came on board, because the players finally were able to justify what they were worth.
The last 5 years of Dennis Lillee's international career were marked by superb performances, along with the occasional controversial incident. In the 1979-80 series against England, he promoted a new aluminium bat and took 11 wickets on a flat track in Melbourne.
And we're talking about a flat batting wicket, basically one of those wickets that not that easy to score runs on, but difficult to take wickets on. And Dennis just was able to produce incredible spells. So instead of just bowling what I'd call seam up, traditional fast bowler's arm, where he hit the seam and move that way, he started to then work on this delivery where he ripped his hand across the seam. And he had this just incredible ability to do that and still maintain his accuracy.
No other seamer could get the ball above the stumps. Dennis bowled England out again with a mixture of leg cutters, slower balls, and the most incredible accuracy you've ever seen. So Melbourne seemed to bring out the best of DK.
Yes, indeed.
And Sarfraz has the distinction of becoming Dennis Lillee's 350th Test victor.
Dennis Lillee retired at the end of the 1983-84 season after captaining Western Australia to victory in the domestic Sheffield Shield final.
Dennis Lillee, in my view, is the greatest fast bowler that I played with or against. I remember my last game for Queensland, my last first-class game was the Sheffield Shield final in 1984, about March 1984, against Western Australia in Perth. And I got 84 in the first innings, and I got out, caught in the slips off Dennis Lillee trying to cut one. It was the first ball he'd ever bowled that I could have played a cut shot to. And I got so excited, I tried to hit it as hard as I could and finished up getting a thick edge and got out, caught it slip. He bowled so few bad balls that he just wore you down. It was like Chinese water torture, that, you know, batting against Dennis. And he was most dangerous on wickets that suited batsmen, because he just wasn't going to give you runs. He wasn't going to let you win, and he made himself into the greatest fast bowler I've ever seen.
Throughout his career, and particularly since his retirement, generations of fast bowlers have benefited from Dennis Lillee's wisdom and experience.
Champion fast bowler, one who a lot of West Indians learned from, because he had pace, he had a wonderful action, swung the ball. In fact, Malcolm Marshall's first tour of Australia, they went to Dennis Lillee and says, how do you get the ball to swing away and also to get it cut back in? And Dennis Lillee talked to him about it, and Malcolm Marshall then credited Dennis Lillee with showing him a few tricks of the trade. And of course, he was, as I say, a champion fast bowler.
Dennis Lillee is arguably the greatest ever pace bowler in the history of the game, and we've developed a long friendship, since the days of playing right to the current time. And the thing that I admired greatly about Dennis was the fact that he was big and strong and aggressive, confident, marvellous skills, wonderful bowling technique. He intimidated the batsman with a bit of chatter from time to time, bit of gamesmanship, and he got you out. And what a tremendous role model that he has been for pace bowlers like myself to emulate.
Dennis Lillee played in 70 test matches. He took 355 wickets at an average of 23.92. He was the first Australian to take 300 test match wickets. He took 5 wickets in an innings 23 times and 10 wickets in a match 7 times. He played in 63 one-day internationals, taking 103 wickets at 20.83, and was the first bowler to take 100 limited overs international wickets.
No, I don't know about history, but I'd always say that Dennis Lillee's the greatest fast bowler I saw. And I'm probably thankful that I only had to play against him in Sheffield Shield cricket, and he was on our side in Test cricket.
Despite his fierce, competitive on-field persona, Lillee remains one of the most well-liked characters in the game.
A good bloke off the field, really was. Very kind to me, actually. Made a point of coming up in that Test match and saying well bowled and well done, and congratulations on making your debut. Completely unexpected. I didn't think he'd be like that off the field, but he actually made you feel welcome.
Dennis off the field was a menace. He was so determined. After his back injury, he worked so hard to come back. Very few people would have overcome the injury, let alone got back and played another 7 or 8 years and been as successful as he was. He took every day as though it could be his last day of cricket. He had no idea how long it was going to be before he broke down again. He worked very hard to maintain his strength and his fitness, but he also worked very hard at enjoying himself, and off the field he could get you into a lot of trouble if you weren't careful.
I remember we were in Perth, I think it was, on a quick bouncy green wicket, and I went out to bat and Dennis came steaming in, and the first ball play a miss, and Dennis the old medallion was swinging here, sweat off, kicked the ground, off he went back. And this went on for 3, 4 deliveries, and the 5th delivery, come whistling through, play and miss again. And each time he bowled and he played and missed, he got further down the wicket, so he was getting nearer to you. By now, the last ball of the over is here, and I've played and missed again. And the medallion's still swinging, the sweat's still pouring off. He had a little bit of hair in those days, not much. And he gave it this one and flicked the sweat, and this time he flicked it straight down the front of my shirt. And he just looked at me, he said, "Jace, matey, do me a favour, mate. You hold the bloody thing still and I'll aim at it."
Lillee was an icon, a metaphor for the brash, uncompromising and successful Australian teams that have emerged since the mid-70s. He remains an inspiration and an invaluable asset for rising fast bowlers. By general consensus, and certainly in the view of most other great pacemen, Dennis Lillee was the finest fast bowler of them all. He ranks in the top echelon of ESPN's Legends of Cricket.